Welcome to the latest edition of Month of Copilot, June 2024. In this episode, we'll be talking to Terence, who is an adoption and change manager for a company called Transparency. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Hi everyone, my name's Terence. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin and Zoe. So I want to talk to you in this episode about the human side of Copilot adoption. There's a lot of news and information about Copilot, understandably so. It's arguably some of the most revolutionary technology ever. I don't think it's too grand a statement to make, certainly in our generation. I think it's right up there with the Industrial Revolution, the personal computing revolution, the introduction of the World Wide Web. It's really quite something. And as with any technology revolution, there are things to think about in terms of human experience. There's pros and cons, and there's, I guess, best practices. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Now, before I get into the details of what I wanted to discuss with you, I think it's worthwhile just setting some context, setting the scene for what we want to talk about. And Copilot adoption, although Copilot is a revolutionary AI technology, the concept of adoption is actually not new. However, I think it's often misunderstood. So conversations I have with customers, not just in my current role, but throughout my career, where I've been working with technical people and end users for the best part of 25 years, there seems to be this misunderstanding that adoption is an optional extra, and that it's kind of bolt-on that you can just buy. It can be done through throwing some training at the end of the project, and that it's something that you can treat as a one-off exercise. And actually, I don't think it's any of those things. Personally, my take on adoption is that by definition, it is the changed way of working. So I'm putting that in the past tense, because if in the context of Copilot, for example, if people don't use it, once you've given it to them and they don't make it part of their daily routine, then they haven't adopted it. Whereas if they do change the way they work to accommodate or integrate Copilot into their daily routine, then they are adopting it. So this is why I'm saying it's not a bolt-on that you can buy. It is actually the end result of effective change management. And when I have this conversation, I sort of get the frowns, and the follow-up question, of course, is, okay, so what is effective change management? And I guess it's the same as with when you talk to a project manager, and everyone kind of understands, at least on some level, project management and why it's a good thing, that the project being delivered on time and within budget, these are the outcomes of good project management. Whereas with change management, when we do these activities, like we do executive sponsorship, we do effective comms, we give people opportunities to learn, we make sure that we've got reinforcement activities and reinforcement mindset, that when we do all these things and we do them according to some kind of plan or model or framework, then the adoption, which is the outcome of our efforts, is going to be better than if we do it half-heartedly, or we don't do any of it. then the adoption is going to be poor. So a second ago, I mentioned models or frameworks, and I don't want to really get hung up on discussing those in too much detail, because there's, as with project management, there's different methodologies, there's different schools of thought and approaches, and I'm not here to talk about which one's right or wrong. I'm just saying you should have one. The benefit of a model or a framework is that you have a checklist of stuff to do, and you're not missing anything from the checklist. Now, again, I don't want to debate, which is better, ProSci, APMG, Microsoft Adoption Framework. They're all good enough for what we're doing here. So you could pick any one, and as long as you do it thoroughly, then you're not going to miss anything major, and your adoption will improve. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'm actually going to talk through the Microsoft Adoption Framework because it's actually the simplest of all of them, and this isn't an adoption framework discussion, so it's going to try to keep it as simple as possible. So Microsoft's adoption framework breaks down into three main phases. They are sequential. There's overlap between them. So there's some elements from, for example, the onboarding, experiment, and deployment phase that you can do first. It's not necessarily always about the order, although some things do need to be in sequence. Again, I just really want to put this out as a minimum or a minimal checklist of things that you need to think about in Copilot adoption. So we start with envisioning. And as the name suggests, this is where you really should have some kind of vision to start with. And this is something that needs to come from the leadership of the organization, from the C-suite. So we need to have an idea of what it is overall, big picture. What is it we're trying to achieve with adopting Copilot, or really any AI? And the vision is really, really important, because it is going to either positively contribute towards what you're trying to do with making Copilot available and getting folks to use it, or the lack of that vision will create an information vacuum. And we all know the saying, nature abhors a vacuum. So change abhors an information vacuum. And if you don't put information out there as part of the vision, then people are going to fill that information in for themselves. And we have, of course, a diversity of folks, the proverbial, some's half glass full, some's glass is half empty. We don't want the pessimists to start filling in that information vacuum with things like AI is going to replace our jobs, AI is going to make humans redundant. So what we want is a clearly articulated vision from the leadership of the organization that is going to put people's minds at rest. And so we need high-level statements of things like, we want to use AI to make individuals more productive in their day-to-day work. We want AI to reduce stress levels, because we acknowledge folks are currently overworked. Microsoft's research, which they put out in there, feels like at least once a quarter, maybe a bit more often, in their work trend index research, that 60-70% of the people they surveyed feel like they don't have enough time to do their job properly. They don't have enough time to have sort of focus on innovation. They're just busy with busy work. And so how is this vision going to help? And that overlaps a lot with strategy, but strategies starts to get a bit more tactical, although that sounds a bit contradictory. But you've got your overall vision, but we've got to break that down into, okay, how are we actually going to do this? And what are our objectives? What are the outcomes we're looking for? And this is really important too, because if I just have a very vague, I want people to be more productive, that sounds great, but how do you measure that? How do you know when it's working? Again, another saying folks like to put out at this stage is, what does good look like? How do we know that Copilot is actually making a difference? So we're going to have these objectives and outcomes, and we'll talk a little bit more about actually measuring this stuff, but we want some high-level vision and we want some medium-level strategic objectives and outcomes at the earliest stage possible. And that then again overlaps with scenarios. So this is where we're thinking more specifically at what is it we want to do. So one of the things we're hearing from pretty much all of our customers is that the Copilot functionality in Teams, where you can summarize meetings at the end of the meeting, and Teams Premium can do this too. It can give you the Teams meeting recap at the end. But what Copilot does, which Teams Premium can't do, is allow you to interrogate the transcript. So I can, for example, look at the recap and it will say, in this meeting we spoke about sensitivity labels. And then I'm thinking back, yeah, we did, but I can't remember which sensitivity labels the customer is actually using specifically. So with Teams Premium, I'd be stuck. I'd have to rewatch the recording to listen again. But with Copilot, I can actually ask it specifically, tell me the labels. And then Copilot will interrogate the transcript and it'll come back and tell you mentioned confidential, secret, and public. Those are the three labels the customer's using. So looking at specific scenarios where I can say we want to use it to generate a recap of the meeting, and then we want to make it part of the routine function that an employee does. After the meeting, you share the summary with the people who attended the meeting. So we're not only saving time by not having to manually type the summary, we are improving the business process by actually doing something that we've known all along. You should share your meeting summaries afterwards, but we never have time because we're on back-to-back calls. So we now have the ability to actually do something which we previously knew we should do, but haven't been able to, and therefore we're bringing about a business process improvement. So it's those kind of specific scenarios that are an important part of the envisioning, and I'm not saying you should have all of them, but what you should do is establish a method by which you capture them. So whether you're using epics and user stories, or you're using Moscow ratings on a spreadsheet, these are kind of standard tools that business analysts and even folks who are not business analysts know about. Which particular one you choose is less important than everybody agreeing that you should be doing it and agreeing on a way to do it. The readiness aspect talks about digital literacy. So here we are in a situation where there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of posting on LinkedIn, social media, everyone's talking about AI, and you can't scroll down a page or two of your LinkedIn newsfeed without some self-proclaimed prompt guru telling you these are the prompts you need. And you look at it and it sort of makes common sense. It's a list of 20, 25 prompts, and it sort of looks good when you look at it on screen, but it just doesn't seem to transition over into how you can practically use them. I'm not saying that's always the case, but there's certainly times when I've personally looked at stuff and thought, yeah, I don't really, this just doesn't come alive for me. I can't really use that. And it's feedback I get from customers as well. So I think something that we do have to understand and accommodate and kind of plan for is that there might be digital literacy or computer skills, whatever you want to call it, but there might be gaps. So one of the things that one of the principles that Copilot works on is being able to perform mundane or routine tasks for you and doing it faster than what you'd be able to do it yourself. But that depends on you being able to, or you knowing that thing's possible. So, for example, let's say you don't really use Word much, and someone says, "Hey, here's a cool prompt that you can take headings and paragraph text, and Copilot will automatically put it in a table for you." But if you've never used Word tables and you don't understand that tables give you kind of different formatting options, tables will allow you to put information in a more compact form. Tables let you kind of categorize information. But if you don't really understand that because you've never been exposed to that feature in Word or you've never really used it, then you're not going to know that you can ask Copilot to do that for you. So it's sort of those unknown unknowns that will prevent people from getting the most out of Copilot because they don't even know how to use the baseline functionality in the product. So what do we do with folks who have that low digital literacy? I'm not saying we should exclude them from using Copilot because it can massively benefit them. I'm just saying that they might need a bit more support and they need to understand when and how to access that support. And we'll talk about community in a sec. I also just want to talk about sponsors. This is really, sorry, not sponsors, roles, of which sponsors is one. This is something which you see in all the change management frameworks because evidence that's been collected for years and years and years has shown that when you don't have all the right roles active and supporting your change initiative, whether it's Copilot or something else, then adoption will suffer. So with ProSlice specifically, they have done research where survey respondents say when we have good executive sponsorship, we see sevenfold increase in the likelihood of the project achieving all of its outcomes. And even where we've only had moderately good exec sponsorship, it's 3 times better than if we had 0 exec sponsorship. So the evidence is out there. It definitely makes a difference to have sponsors, especially. And these folks shouldn't just be the sort of the stereotypical there to talk about change at maybe an all-staff meeting or a what do they call them, all hands meeting. They're not just there to be the proverbial cutting the ribbon kind of dignitary. Exec sponsors should be actively involved in supporting the change all the time. And really, really important point for me is that they should lead by example. So when we're telling folks to use Copilot and the CTO or the CEO says, I don't really like Copilot, I don't want to use it, I know how to draft an email, for example, that really undermines the message that you're trying to do with this change. And people will think, well, if the boss doesn't have to do it, then I don't have to do it. If the boss says it doesn't work and it's a bit suspect, or it's not worthwhile doing, then I'm not even going to try. Because why should I go outside of my comfort zone to go through the pain of change when the boss doesn't have to? So I'm not going to. So really, that kind of leading by example, constantly doing positive communication. It doesn't have to be sort of emails and so on. It can be participation in community. That's really, really important. Of course, we've got our users who are going to be, the main critical mass of folks who are using the product and will give us that tipping point of achieving value for the investment that we're doing. We've got IT who, of course, supporting this technically, and then we've got champions. So that's also a pretty well understood concept, I think. Maybe in some cases, certainly with customers I've worked with, they don't actually like referring to champions because there have been a lot of half-baked, unsuccessful change initiatives which have tried to use champions, and due to the lack of success, shall we say, on those projects, that the champion label gets a bit tarnished. So you might call it something else, but it's really, really valuable to have these folks in place. And very briefly, I think a champion has two main responsibilities. Firstly is they are a coach, and I'm using that word really carefully. I'm not saying trainer, because really you should have separate dedicated training or learning opportunity resources available. So what the champion's very good at is in that situation where the person sat on the desk next to them, if you're back in the office, and they hear someone say, "Oh, I can't believe Copilot's not doing blah blah blah," that the champion can go over and say, "Hey, let me take a look. Let's see what we're doing here," and they can provide that kind of ad hoc, in the moment learning support rather than a formal trainer function. And in the same kind of way, they can provide support as well. So again, they are not IT support. And if somebody, because of course, chances are good that within a particular team or a department, the champions will be well known. They'll be the kind of go-to people. So again, someone's struggling to do something in Copilot, it's not working for them, they might actually go ask the champion, "Hey, Terence, I'm trying to do this and XYZ is happening." That the champion would have the experience, maybe even a bit of training, to understand what's happening. So if it looks like something's not working because the user is not following the right steps, that the champion can say to them, "Let's try and do it this way and see if it makes a difference." But if they recognize, "Oh, hang on, this actually looks broken, this is an error message as opposed to just not quite giving the results we're expecting," then they know the escalation path. They know whether we, what do we do next? Do we post something in the community? Do we raise a ticket, a general ticket for IT? Do we contact the project team, if we're still in a kind of pilot phase? But they know what's the escalation path to get that user help. So it's support, but lowercase s. They're not the help desk. So in that sense, champions are really valuable change agents, but they aren't formally responsible, or maybe they are. Maybe you want to have that kind of slightly more formal, what are the gives and the gets? So the gives that the company gives them is earlier access to training, maybe a membership of a team, which includes project members and IT, where they can go for answering their own maybe more advanced questions. Maybe there's some incentives, rewards, some gamification, however you want to do this. We talk about some of this in the last phase of change management. But the get, what the champions get in exchange, or tying myself a bit in knots here. So the company gives those benefits, which the champion gets. And then what do the champions give? So this is where we have that expectation that we're saying, we of course can't force you because this is not officially part of your job role, but what we would very much like champions to do is to support the change. And that, I think, can go beyond the two things I just mentioned now. They can then also start to include communication boosters, where they ask their team members, hey, have you seen the latest comms? Did you have any questions about it? If you do, post a question in the community. So that they're amplifying comms. They're also keeping a lookout for rumors and misinformation, so that information vacuum I spoke about earlier is where champions can be really useful when they start hearing things like, the end game is for Copilot to be used to cut jobs. And if they know that that's not true, then they can stomp on that rumor straight away, and they can escalate it to leadership, and we can deal with it. What we don't want is fear and uncertainty and doubt being bred by misinformation and rumors. And then finally, community. So really, really important. And this can take the shape of a team in Microsoft Teams. It can take the shape of a community in Viva Engage, or whatever tooling your company uses. But it's a place where people know they can come ask questions. It's a place where news can be amplified. So you might want to be sending out your comms through email, or you might be doing it through posters that you print up and put in the office, or digital signage. It can be talks that are given as part of regular meetings, both on a departmental basis, a team basis, or the kind of bigger all hands meetings. But the thing about all of those communication methods is they're kind of a one-off. You get a flyer through your letterbox, you look at it, you read it, maybe you don't, and it goes in the bin. So the community is a good repository to store copies of those communications that have gone out, so that folks can go back in case they've deleted emails, in case they forget that they even got the email in the first place. And of course, your new starters, because some of these projects run for months. I'm talking specifically now about Copilot pilots, and you'll have people joining the organization after those initial comms went out, so that they never got the email. So having a place, and again, Teams or Viva Engage make really good repositories where the copies of those postings can be stored and people can go look at them afterwards. And of course, then success sharing. So this is where we inspire other people to use the tools, because we are sharing relatable examples. It's not IT saying, go and do this and this because it will hopefully, maybe fingers crossed, work for you. It is actually someone from their team, their department, or maybe in a similar role. I might be in finance in the London office, but there's someone in finance in our Berlin office who has done something with Copilot. It's really worked well for them, and then I'm inspired to try it because it's much more relatable, it's much more real to me. So in summary, these are all things which we need to think about and plan during the envisioning phase. You then move on to onboarding, experimenting, and deploying. Technical readiness is obviously very important, but since this discussion is really focused on the human side of change, I'm going to skip over that for now. And I imagine a lot of the other folks who are contributing to the month of Copilot will be doing so from a technical readiness aspect. So we're going to assume that the techies are listening to all the podcasts that they should be doing and that they are ready to support from a technical point of view. Something which is really sort of the Venn diagram of technical and user experiences. So there's a big overlap here for security. And this is definitely something which you can try and plan ahead and put measures in place to mitigate risk, but you're often not really going to know until you start trying. So during this onboarding, experimentation, and deployment phase, you need to be communicating with your users to always be mindful of safety. Now, Copilot has picked up quite a bit of negative hype around security. There's quite a lot of, shall we say, alarmist and maybe not really justified security noise around Copilot. Realistically, we do, though, have to acknowledge that there are, from a user point of view anyway, there's kind of three main risks. The first is oversharing. The second is legacy membership, and then something I call splash damage. So from the oversharing point of view, this is where you have gone into Teams, you've gone into SharePoint, or maybe even your OneDrive, you've selected a file, you've clicked the share button, and you have possibly left the default settings in place, which say this will be shared with everyone in the, well, let me step back on that. It's not shared with everyone in the company, because not everyone gets an email saying, "Woo, it's just been shared, a file from Terence." It is that this file will be accessible to everyone in the company if they've got the link. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds, but it's still pretty bad, because I can share that link with Kevin, for example. But if Kevin then forwards it to Zoe, she doesn't actually have access to the file automatically, but when she clicks that link, she gets access. And once she has clicked that link, or anyone else who gets forwarded a copy of the email that Kevin originally got from me, when they click that link, they get access to the file. And what Copilot, I mean, this was a problem before Copilot, by the way. But what Copilot does is it aggravates the damage that this could cause by making it easier to stumble on this information. So Copilot is actually inherently very secure, because it only works with information that you have got permission to. The problem is when you've got permission to stuff that you don't know that you have, or that you maybe shouldn't have, that Copilot can come up with results that you actually aren't authorized to view. Technically, you're authorized because you've somehow got permission to them, but you, from a human point of view, you shouldn't have permission. So that's obviously really bad. The second thing that could happen is legacy membership. So this is where people are left in SharePoint sites, or they're left in Teams that they shouldn't be members. So an example would be someone works in HR, or people and culture. So they've got access to really sensitive information about colleagues, all sorts of protected data that they have got legitimate access to because they're in HR. But then what happens if they get promoted? So you promoted out of HR, you're now going to be in the L&D team, we're going to be internal comms. Now you're not in HR anymore, but you aren't removed from that team or that SharePoint site or from some data which is in somebody's OneDrive that was shared with you because you were in HR. And now you're not. So you're actually, through no fault of your own, shall we say, you're in a position where Copilot can go dig up information and return it from a prompt that you should not be able to see. And that's really bad. And the third factor, which I mentioned earlier, I don't, this isn't a technical term, but because I'm played a lot of computer games in my life, and one of the concepts we've got there, when you shoot a rocket at one enemy and the resulting explosion actually takes down 4 or 5 enemies that were standing next to them. So that's what we refer to as splash damage. And Copilot can do this too, because Copilot uses Microsoft Graph, which is, in case folks aren't familiar, I'll just explain it as simply and briefly as possible. But it's an interconnected web of all the working relationships that you have and all the actions that you take in Microsoft 365. So when you email people, when you attend meetings with them, if you've got the same line manager, Microsoft Graph starts building this web or this mesh of relationships, interconnected data and people. So I could ask Copilot a question and it could answer my question, but also pull extra information because it thinks the context of my query it would be useful to bring out something else. So again, we look at a HR example. I'm asking something which I think is just an internal comms question, like who, let's pretend we're working for a big international company. I don't know who the head of engineering in our Singapore office is. So I type into Copilot, who's our head of engineering in Singapore office, and Copilot comes back and says, well, that's Joseph Chen, just making a name up here, but they're on annual leave because they have blah, blah, blah medical condition, which is an information management disaster. I should not be shown that information, but Copilot thinks it's relevant and it's feeding me the stuff because it thinks I'm still in HR, because I'm still in the HR site. So that's what I mean by splash damage. Now, these aren't necessarily the responsibility of the person who's written the prompt, but this can happen to somebody who's written a prompt. So the importance of the experimentation, onboarding and deployment phase here is when something like this happens, what do you do? Do I raise a ticket? Do I, or whatever it is that I'm going to be action I'm taking in response to this, what looks to be quite a concerning security breach, and that we then learn lessons from that, which we'll talk about in the next phase. You might want to run an early adopter program. In fact, it's highly recommended to have a pilot of some kind. Some companies will call it a pilot. Some find it a bit confusing because now you've got your Copilot pilot. Try to say that 10 times fast. So quite a lot of customers I deal with refer to this as a proof of concept or a proof of technology. One customer even calls it a proof of value, which is quite interesting. We'll talk about that in the last slide. Now, of course, it's really important during this kind of onboarding phase that people understand what's happening, why it's happening, and when it's happening. So effective communication And again, I mentioned a bit of this earlier, but whether it's through email, whether it's through face-to-face meetings, posters, electronic signage, in fact, a lot of change management professionals wouldn't choose between one of those. You just do them all, because there will be folks who don't read their email but do see the signage, or don't see the email or the signage but they do attend the meeting. So we've got to make sure that we saturate the organization on all communication channels so that folks get the message. And it should, of course, be non-technical, non-jargon, and address the key questions. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? What is the risk of not doing it? How are we going to do it? Is it department by department? Is everybody getting it at once? Things like, how do I access training? When will I get it? And also, in every comms, there should be a call to action of some kind. Now, that isn't necessarily something people have to do. It could just be letting them know how they can get support if they need it. So a link to the community, or a link to the form to book training. So anyway, we could do we could do a whole hour-long conversation on just communications campaigns, but those are kind of the essential things that you should be looking at. And then finally, learning opportunities. So you aren't empowering people by just giving them a tool and saying, off you go. Empowering them must come hand in hand with the communications, which we discussed a second ago, as well as learning opportunities. And those can be sort of instructor-led face-to-face or remote sessions that we do with teams, that we do kind of show and tell. We give people a chance to practice with the tools, ask questions. That's I would say this, of course, because my background is in being a trainer, so I believe that kind of training is the really the most effective. But of course, it's complex to organize, it's expensive from a time and resource point of view, but it really is the best way. If it's not possible to do that, then we could use tools like Viva Learning or Microsoft Learn, where we give folks access to these materials. They can study, they can practice. I've put self-study as a separate point. Now I know that Viva Learning and Microsoft Learn, these are self-study tools. But there's an aspect of self-study which can be a bit risky and a bit dangerous, and this is when folks go outside of a curated or an approved learning experience, and they will go on to something like YouTube, and that's not inherently wrong or bad, but it is uncontrolled. And the risk that we introduce there is that someone will watch a video which doesn't actually apply to them. So it could be the video was recorded on an earlier version of Copilot, maybe during the preview phase, and so that function doesn't work the same anymore. It could be that it applies to folks that have got a different sort of licensing level. So I maybe got an E3 license, somebody else got an E5 license, so they can do something which I can't do. But I watch the video, it looks great, I try it on my computer and it doesn't work. And then I kind of go in this downward spiral of must be me, I must be stupid that I can't do this properly, or IT's set the software up wrong, and there's all kind of bad feeling and potential negativity that comes around that. So I'm not saying you should ban people from using YouTube to self-study. It's not just YouTube, of course. There's videos on TikTok, and there's other learning platforms, even LinkedIn Learning and that kind of stuff. It's just about are they getting the learning message that you want them to get? So this is why it's better that we do the provision of the learning material ourselves. Anyway, that's quite a lot of food for thought there, and we've only got another 15 minutes or so. So moving on to the final phase, which is this driving value and optimization. I must confess I've got a personal aversion to talking about driving adoption or driving value, because it makes it sound like we're cowboys and we're cracking the whip to drive cattle, and that's not how people like to be treated. So I like to think about maybe nurturing adoption and optimizing what we've got. Now, of course, we need metrics. We need some way of measuring what's actually going on. And that goes hand in hand with success criteria. So if you don't know how you've defined what good looks like, then how can you measure it? Measuring against what? So what we'll find in this is more interesting for the technical folks, but inside of Microsoft's Microsoft 365 Admin Center, you go down into your reporting section and you go into your adoption metrics, and there is a dedicated Copilot section there where you can see on a very high level percentage, of the people in your organization who have licenses assigned to them, how many of them are actually using it. And that can be on a 7-day, 30-day, 90-day, I think 180 days basis, and you can get a percentage of how folks are using it. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove adoption. It just proves that they are using it at all. They could be doing one Copilot action, which is only providing them with a little bit of a productivity boost, a little bit of a time saving, and I would say that that's not great adoption. The product's not paying for itself by any means. But you can scroll a bit further on that page and then you can see a breakdown by app. So Copilot in Teams, Copilot chatbot, as opposed to Copilot in Teams meetings, Copilot in Word and PowerPoint and Excel. So you can start then getting a slightly more granular picture of how the apps are being used. And then you scroll down a bit further and you can then see on an individual basis who is using what app. And the metric that it uses is to report when last did the person use a particular app. So you can see, for Terence, he used Teams meeting Copilot 2 days ago. In PowerPoint, used it today. Word, used it today. In Excel, used it 3 weeks ago. So that can start building a picture of, hang on a second, why aren't we using it in Excel? Is that just because the job role doesn't require it? Or is there some kind of blocker that is preventing adoption of Copilot in Excel? So you have fairly good metrics. If you are a Viva Insights subscriber, then you have access to an even richer reporting dashboard. I'm not going to go into details on that now. Suffice to say, we have ways of measuring this, but it needs to be measured against some kind of expectation, which is why the success criteria is so important. That's your quantitative feedback. Of course, we need to capture qualitative feedback as well. So this is actually from users, from stakeholders. How's it going? Is Viva Engage actually delivering against what you expected? Is it making your life any easier? Is it helping you save time? It's not purely just about time savings. There's also reduction in stress levels. There's reduction in procrastination. There's improvement of business process, which has got all sorts of positive knock-on effects that are, it's not possible to detect them in the metrics that you're capturing. It's not in the hard data, so you have to ask people, and you've got to trust people. I've had some pushback from a couple of customers when going through this with them, where they say, "Oh, but people will just lie to keep Copilot. They'll be dishonest on their feedback form." And I'm thinking, okay, but in a sense that's actually, from a certain point of view, that is a positive thing, because if they like Copilot enough to fib on the form, that's telling you something, isn't it? It's telling you that they find it sufficiently beneficial to, quote unquote, to do what it takes to keep hold of that software. So yeah, if you are worried that people are going to be lying on their forms to keep Copilot, there's maybe some cultural things to think about there as well in your organization. But on the whole, I think people are trustworthy, and you should take them at face value. Anyway, collecting feedback, really important. Of course, we then use that feedback to feed into a mindset or a culture of continuous improvement. And I don't think you'll find anybody who says, nah, continuous improvement's not good. I think we all agree that it is good. I think there is, though, a risk if you are pushing continuous improvement all the time, if you're doing it too much, that you begin to build up change fatigue. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't continuously improve, but think about the cadence or the intervals. So if, for example, part of your continuous improvement is sending out communication, we've been monitoring the community, and these are the success stories, these are the really good prompts that people have suggested. If you're emailing out something every single day, then you increase the risk that people are just going to get sick of it and start ignoring those emails. So think about your approach, think about how you can fine-tune the way that you actually implement that continuous improvement culture. And that speaks to a broader change culture. And that's really quite an interesting and potentially challenging thing to do, because culture is quite a slippery concept. It's quite hard to pin down. But I think there's some fundamentals that we can use to discuss and think about and maybe implement some things. So in my experience and my point of view, culture is mostly driven by example. So what behaviors get rewarded, and what behaviors get tolerated. I don't know if you follow a guy called John Amici on LinkedIn. He's the first UK born athlete to play in the American NBA, the basketball league. So he's not playing basketball anymore. He's now a psychologist, specializing in helping companies with culture and stuff like that. And he posted something on LinkedIn a while back, which said culture is based on the worst behavior a company will tolerate. And I think that's very true. So when people get away with bad behavior, it doesn't matter what kind of behavior, but sort of, gossiping, passing on rumors, speaking negatively about other people, cheating, that where that kind of unethical or bad behavior is brushed under the carpet or tolerated, then it begins to have a toxic effect on company culture. Now, that's quite a rabbit hole I don't want to go down any further, but there is a flip side to that coin, which is the behavior that gets rewarded. People see, people take note, and so if we can have got some positive bits and pieces that we can do to reward when people are curious, when people share their knowledge, when people demonstrate teamwork, should I say, and of course the leading by example. So this is where, if the exec, C-suite, senior leadership team, whatever you want to call themselves, and middle management, so your heads of department, your managers and so on, if they are visibly using Copilot and they're telling people about how cool it is, that is setting a tone, and it's beginning to nurture a culture where Copilot can flourish. And finally, some kind of rewards or recognition, which I've touched on already. This is a way to reinforce the cultural norms that we want to see. So in summary, that human side of Copilot adoption involves quite a lot of, psychology. It involves planning and preparation according to a framework. And as I said earlier, it's not the particular framework that's massively important, which one you choose. It's just that you choose a framework, because that will give you a checklist of stuff to make sure you don't forget anything important. So thanks very much to Kevin and Zoe for hosting me on this month of Copilot podcasts. If I can, I'd just like to quickly plug my community that I set up. So it's on LinkedIn. It's called Copilot Connect UK. And we'd love to have you. The focus of the community is more business orientated than technical. So we'd like CIOs, CTOs, but even non-technical business people who are interested in Copilot to join. And I'm looking at setting up some in-person community meetings as well, once the holiday silly season's over. So yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. Of course, if you don't already subscribe to Copilot Connection, do check out our website on copilotconnection.com. Check out our LinkedIn group, or our LinkedIn page, should I say, which is on the URL on the screen as well. And of course, tune in on YouTube, where we'd love you to like and subscribe. That's it for this episode. Thank you very much, and see you next time.